Heading into 2018 for the Indianapolis Colts, there were question marks. They got burned by their first choice, Josh McDaniels, as head coach, so they ended up circling the wagons and settling on Frank Reich. Then you've got Andrew Luck coming off of the previous couple of seasons with the injury problems, missing time due to the shoulder injury and so forth. What was he going to look like coming back? Was he actually going to be healthy? In terms of the roster around him, was this necessarily going to be a team that could step up and play to a high level? And even though they started off kind of slow, 1-5, they pulled it together as the season went along, and Luck had a really, really good year, and the Colts ended up making the playoffs and ended up winning a playoff game at that. So you're talking about what you had established was you might have gotten the right guy, a head coach in Frank Reich. You might have your franchise quarterback, Andrew Luck, back in the fold, and it looks like you have one of the great younger general managers in the game in Chris Ballard. So there were certainly reason to have some expectations heading into 2019. You got Andrew Luck back in the fold another season. You got another offseason with cap space and draft picks for Chris Ballard to try and improve this roster. And then everything changed. I can't tell you again how surreal of an experience it was back in August, watching that preseason game on a Saturday night, or was it Friday night, whichever night it was. And as the game's going on, it's Bears and it's Colts. They're in Indy. And all of a sudden the news drops that Andrew Luck is expected to announce his retirement the next afternoon. Insane. You want to talk about one of those unexpected, shocking type of moments? That was one of those, and certainly was for this Colts franchise, this Colts organization, because here you are planning on one reality and one thing, and it's really too late to do anything. It's not like this happened in April or something where you could address the position in the draft, free agency, trade market. Now, if you go out there at the end of August, right before the start of the season, you trade for anybody, are they really going to be anything better than what you have on the roster, namely Jacoby Brissett? Or are you going to end up doing one of those dumb Minnesota Vikings type of, we're going to give you a first-round pick for Sam Bradford's sorry self type of trades? It really, really left them in a bad spot. Andrew Luck can do whatever the heck he wants, absolutely. But the timing of it was horrible. The way it was done was very selfish, and I will stand by that opinion. But nonetheless, life goes on in the NFL, and the Colts had to figure out a way to move on, and they decided to roll on with Jacoby Brissett. They gave him an extra year on his contract, and they were going to roll with him because at least you could say with Brissett, he had already brought him into the fold. He had gotten some playing time in 2017, so this wasn't his first rodeo. And early on, the returns looked promising for the Colts. They were 3-2 heading into the bye, including road wins against teams like Tennessee and Kansas City, playoff teams. Like, you're looking at this Colts team and you're saying, hey, this Frank Reich is a really good head coach. Jacoby Brissett might be the guy, or enough of a guy where you could still be a serious team there in the AFC South especially. Then you come off of the bye, you beat Houston, you beat Denver, and now you're looking at the Colts and they're 5-2. Like, you're looking at potentially Frank Reich Coach of the Year type of material after 7 games. 5-2, and you lost your franchise quarterback. How many other teams could do that? And then the rest of the season happened. Ultimately, when all was said and done, I don't think Jacoby Brissett was very good. Marlon Mack was. He went over 1,000 yards rushing. You look at the passing game in general for the Colts. T.Y. Hilton didn't have a great year. Nobody really had a great year. The defense was stout against the run, but they struggled against the pass. Adam Vinatieri, future first ballot Hall of Famer, the greatest kicker in NFL history, had a rough ended the season on IR. He made less than 70% of his field goals. He missed 6 extra points, and you could say his misses cost them a couple of key games that could have really made a difference in this season. And with Jacoby Brissett ultimately not being good, it wasn't hard to see how this team ultimately finished 7-9. It's got to be a disappointing finish for a Colts team that was rocked by Luck's retirement. But then, as the season went along, you're sitting there at 5-2. You got to think at 5-2, you got at least some type of chance to sniff the playoffs. You don't expect to go 2-7 the rest of the way, which is exactly what the Colts did. So now they tried to make the best out of the bad situation, but it ultimately wasn't good enough. They've got to look ahead. And the first thing you got to do is you got to figure out what's the decision at the quarterback position? Are you going to do option A, which is roll with Jacoby Brissett again in 2020 and hope it improves and gets better? B, are you going to go out there in the trade market or in free agency and go find a quarterback? You've got $96 million in cap space. So if you wanted to go make a big play for a Teddy Bridgewater or a Phillip Rivers or somebody like that, you certainly could. You'll have the money to be able to do so. Or C, do you potentially look at trying to find somebody in the draft and trying to find your next Andrew Luck type of franchise quarterback? It's kind of weird because now the Colts go from a 2018 season where you're looking at, hey, they won this many games, they made the playoffs, and they won a playoff game. The future is bright. Luck's back in the fold. Everything is right. And now all of a sudden, they feel like they're going to be potentially stuck in that perpetual cycle of mediocrity. Like, this is going to be a very important offseason for the Colts, specifically at the quarterback position. Now, in terms of the draft class that they had in 2019, it wasn't quite as good as the 2018 one that had Quentin Nelson and Darius Leonard in it. Rock Ya-Sin, Ben Banogu, Paris Campbell, Okirike. I expect those guys to contribute more in year number 2 than they did in year number 1, but they didn't get a super ton amount of production out of this draft class, nearly like they did in 2018. But maybe they don't need to have 2018 level production, but they need to get more production out of it than they did this year. When you look at the offseason, you talk about free agency. They've got a couple of free agents. It looks like Eric Ebron's probably not going to be brought back. He had a great season with Andrew Luck at the helm in 2018, Pro Bowl type of season. Then 2019 kind of came crashing back down to a little bit more of what Eric Ebron was during his time with the Detroit Lions. You've got Jabal Sheard's a free agent. Devin Funchess is a free agent. Probably the most important free agent they have is Anthony Costanzo. Yes, he's over 30, but he's still a really good left tackle in the league. And you would find it very hard to believe that they want to do anything other than keep Costanzo for a couple more years to keep that really good Indianapolis Colts offensive line intact. But they have money in free agency to go out there and make big things happen. And you wonder, based off of all that cap space and based off of where they sit at the quarterback position, if they are going to be players in this offseason and they're going to try and bring in some type of big-name veteran via trade or via free agency. In terms of their overall team needs, I've already talked at length about quarterback. That, to me, is the number one need. But regardless of whether you roll with Brissett or you trade for a guy or you sign a guy in free agency and or you pick one in the draft, you got to get better at wide receiver. T.Y. Hilton did not have a great year, and even if he did, he's the only guy you got on the outside. It's a bunch of other role players and disappointments around him, and that's fact. So you've got to be able to upgrade this position where the Colts are going to be sitting at with the 13th overall pick in round 1. If they wanted to potentially go wide receiver, they certainly could. But the good thing is especially with this wide receiver class that's really deep, combined with the fact of wide receiver trends in recent years, you can find difference makers and game changers and studs at the receiver position in rounds 2 and 3, which works out well for the Colts because they've got 2 second-round picks and a third-round pick, and they've got a 4th, a 5th, a 6th, and a 7th. So they got plenty of draft pick capital here. They can get aggressive if they want to, or they can just trade down and acquire more draft pick capital for this year or next year. They got a lot of variety and flexibility in terms of what they could do. Another key area for them to address is going to be kicker. You'd assume Vinatieri is done, and even if he wasn't done, he needs to be done with this team because all the great years that he gave you, 2019 certainly was not one of them. One of those clear examples of maybe a guy ended up hanging on, unfortunately, for 1 year too long. And that is a position that one way or another they'll have to make sure they tighten up. In terms of the defensive side of the ball, I still like to see them upgrade on that defensive front, specifically on the interior. They don't have anybody that really scares you there. I think that would certainly help them in terms of being able to get after the quarterback up the middle, makes things easier in that linebacking court for Darius Leonard. I still would like to see them add more talent in the secondary, specifically at corner. I know they took Rock Ya-Sin in round number 2, but he's not enough. They need some more talent there. It's one of these things where I look at the Colts, and you got studs. You've got guys like Darius Leonard, Malik Hooker, Quentin Nelson. The offensive line in general is pretty good. Marlon Mack had a really nice season. So the talent cupboard certainly is not bare here. But to me, this is clearly one of those examples that they've got to get the quarterback right, whatever the decision that is that they make, Otherwise, this thing could end up going south pretty quickly for this Colts organization.